Prices at the grocery store are skyrocketing. The number of people who are barely getting by is growing. Most corporations prioritize their responsibility to shareholders above all else. In the United States, we are living in a world of destructive corporate capitalism. Welcome back to the Reimagining Ourselves podcast, where we spend time dreaming of the world that we could create together. You're going to hear dogs and babies on this podcast in the background of almost every episode, so if that bothers you, this probably isn't for you. Today we are interrupting our series on Focus on the Family to talk about how community can be a protection against the increasingly painful realities of corporate capitalism. I want you to ask yourself, are you working yourself into an early grave trying to keep up with a system that was not built for you? Has the promise of the American dream kept you on a never-ending treadmill of trading your time for shareholder profits? Because people are literally and figuratively getting destroyed in our current economic system. Whether you become unable to afford the things you need to survive, or you make it to the top of that hierarchy and feel your spirit being crushed, from either end of the spectrum and everywhere in between, corporate capitalism is destructive, and we need an alternative. And I have a pretty powerful one that has stood the test of time that I'm going to talk to you about today. But first, let's talk about what's wrong with the system we have now. We are living under a cannibalistic form of capitalism in the United States, where corporations just get bigger and bigger and it's never enough. And the best way I've heard this described is wendigo economics. So to understand the idea of wendigo economics, let's first talk about what the wendigo is. The concept of wendigo comes to us from the Algonquian people, which I'm very grateful for because there's not a word like this in the English that fully captures this that I've ever heard. And of course, like everything else, I'm going to be explaining it from my own perspective. So, take it with a grain of salt. And I encourage you to look more into some of these teachings for yourself. My understanding of the wendigo is both as, at least as a real physical corporeal creature, and as a more abstract concept. So let me explain the creatures first. They are said to have begun their lives as humans, but have gone through irreversible changes after succumbing to the terrible act of cannibalism, which is associated with the starvation period of the winter. People who engaged in cannibalism may have been cast out of their communities and struggled to survive, wandering through freezing landscapes on their own. The unsettling idea is that these humans sort of devolved into terrifying creatures, and its taste for human flesh is never satiated. The creature keeps growing proportionately to all it has consumed. The wendigo is never able to be satisfied. The wendigo is said to possess other humans who turn to cannibalism or otherwise display excessive greed or selfishness. So you can see how this idea begins to translate to something more abstract. In a book called Columbus and Other Cannibals, the Wétiko Disease of Exploitation, Imperialism, and Terrorism, Dr. Jack D. Forbes connects this wendigo or wétiko energy to the cannibalistic acts of exploitation and imperialism. He points out that the wealthy and exploitative literally consume the lives of those they exploit. One small example is the ways that stress leads to a number of chronic illnesses, and this disproportionately impacts oppressed populations. Floor workers, whether it's in the mills or at Amazon, have worse health outcomes than those higher up. As Forbes argues, this is literally cannibalism, and the perpetrators of these systems are impacted by a kind of wendigo psychosis where they cannot stop consuming. Winona LaDuke was a student of economics at Harvard, where she observed this wendigo economic system and, to my knowledge, coined this term. She recognized that the corporate capitalism of the United States grows and exploits endlessly. These systems are set up to extract as much as possible from their workers for the most profit to the CEO, the higher level executives, and the shareholders. I hear so many stories from my clients about the ways that these corporations are just cannibalizing themselves. People are being asked to do more and more work and are being pushed to the breaking point. The more that people reach that breaking point and quit, often for their literal physical health, the more that many of these corporations try to extract from their remaining workers until the whole system crumbles. Let me give you what I think is a really good example of this wendigo economic system. The CEO to worker compensation rate has exploded. In 1965, this ratio was a little over 20, meaning that the CEO of a large publicly owned company made roughly 20 times the salary of their production and non-supervisory workers of the key industry of their firm. In 2021, that ratio was 389. The CEO of a large publicly owned company was making roughly 389 times the salary of their production and non-supervisory workers of the key industry of their firm. This is wendigo economics, where these people are caught in this illusion that this kind of cancerous growth can just go on forever. Our wendigo economic system is driving so much of the hardship that people are feeling right now. I'm not going to totally pretend to understand inflation, but it's clearly related to those corporate structure issues we just talked about. And it's also fascinating that the federal government can spend billions and billions on weapons and warfare, but can't do anything about the price of food for its own citizens. We package food in plastic and put a price tag on it and let people starve even though we have enough food to feed everyone. Large grocery store chains have allegedly been caught pouring bleach onto food to destroy it, to make sure hungry people don't eat it out of the dumpster without paying for it. We've built an entire system that puts money before people with that insatiable wendigo spirit, and it can't help but cannibalize itself. The other piece I'll just touch on briefly is the prophecy of the seventh fire. I'll leave the link to the full prophecy as recorded by the Canadian Aboriginal Indigenous Directory. And I'm just going to read you the seventh fire prophecy. The seventh prophet was younger than the others who had come, and there was a glowing light from his eyes. He said that there would come a time when the waters had been so poisoned that the animals and plants that lived there would fall sick and begin to die. Much of the forests and prairies would be gone, so the air would begin to lose the power of life. The way of the mind brought to the red, black, and yellow nation by the white nation would bring danger to the whole earth. In this time, there will be a new people who will emerge from the clouds of illusion. They will retrace their steps to find the treasures that had been left by the trail. The stories that had been lost will be returned to them. They will remember the original instructions and find strength in the way of the circle. Their search will take them to the elders, and the new people will ask for guidance. But many of the elders will have walked the path of the souls to the star web. Many elders will have forgotten their wisdom and will not be able to help. Some of the elders will point in the wrong direction, and others will remain silent because of their fear. Some of the elders will be silent because no one has asked them for their wisdom. If the new people will find trust in the way of all things, in the circle, they will no longer need the selfish voice of the ego, and they can begin to trust their inner voice. Wisdom will once again be found in the dreams of the night and of the day. The sacred fire will once again be lit. The light-skinned people will be given a choice between two paths. If they choose the right path, the seventh fire will light the eighth fire, and final fire of brotherhood and sisterhood. If they choose the wrong path, remaining on the path of the mind, then the destruction they brought with them will come back to destroy them. The people of the earth will experience much suffering and death. End quote. So these two paths are described as a crossroads that humanity, or maybe particularly the light-skinned people, will come to. One path will be green and lush, the other will be well-worn but scorched. If we continue to choose the well-worn path of destruction, we will forfeit the privilege of living on this planet. But if we can bring ourselves back into relationship with all life and choose that green path that is in harmony with the rest of the natural world, we could have an unprecedented time of peace. And so it's critical for us to leave that scorched path. And there's not much doubt in my mind that corporate capitalism is on that scorched path. So let's talk about what we can do instead, because we don't have to go down with this ship. I know it can feel really hard to imagine something different, but it gets easier and easier the more we practice. And collective beliefs are so powerful, which means that the more of us that truly imagine what it would be like, that begin to think this way, the easier it will become. It's going to take some effort to shift our ways of interacting with the world around us. It's easy to slip back into an old mindset. So if all of this sounds unrealistic to you right now, I just want to encourage you to try to imagine this with me, because even though it might sometimes feel a little bit like swimming upstream, it's worth the effort to realign ourselves with life and the natural world. So the big alternative that I'm bringing you today is to build and strengthen our communities. Community has always been imperative to our survival, because human beings are not capable of individually holding all of the knowledge and skills that the world has to offer. We are so lucky to be social creatures who can develop different skills, share gifts with each other, and protect one another. This is a quiet and peaceful strategy for divesting our energy from a failing system. It's the most graceful transition out of corporate capitalism I can think of, and I won't deny that removing ourselves from this system might require work and creative thinking, but I think we're well equipped and more than capable. I'm going to share a couple of inspirational ideas that I've heard along the way, and I'll also share some examples of the ways that I've been implementing this in my own life. If you're listening and any ideas come to you, I would love to hear them. So what I mean by building community is creating genuine local relationships. Not only is this nice, not only does it improve your mental health and quality of life, but it is a survival imperative, as well as an exit strategy for corporate capitalism. It's providing the emotional, spiritual, and physical sustenance of one another, because we care about one another. And it's localizing the things that we need to survive. Things like food, water, energy, shelter, and education. Finally, it's including the natural world beneath your feet and the non-human animals in your community. Coming back to Winona LaDuke, let's also talk about the idea of earth-based economics. This framework is also localized, and it includes seeing our investments as the work and effort that we put into caring for the soil, our crops, the lakes and rivers and oceans, etc. We have to stop destroying these sources of our survival. As Winona says, it is our water, it is our land, it does not belong to corporations. She points out that if we are listening to the earth at this moment in time, if we want to survive, we need to grow food that can sustain us through climate change. Crops that are drought resistant, wind resistant, and of course, we need to get more renewable energy. Basically, we need to remember how to work with the earth. So let's just talk a little bit about what it would mean to localize our food production and what it would change in our food. Locally grown food is different than mass-produced food. Not only is it a useful thing to do to help reduce our reliance on a food system that is collapsing, it has a whole bunch of other benefits. Because actually the soil that you grow your food in matters. The relationship you have to that land matters, and the intentions you have while growing it matter. In my experience, if you start with a little bit of gardening or homesteading, you'll be able to add more on little by little as you practice and learn and get better. And on a small scale, I've gotten to see what this is like in a community. Because my neighbors and I exchange crops in the late summer. One friend grows basil and another friend grows sweet potatoes. If we all just work on developing a couple of these skills, combined with the power of cooperation and collaboration, our capacity to feed our own communities could grow. And gardening and growing food also often changes your relationship to the land and to the natural world, which can be so beneficial to everyone. I think it was Robin Wall Kimmerer who said, if you don't know where to start rebuilding your relationship with the land, start with a garden. And we are so lucky to have resources like the internet and YouTube where you can learn all about how to set up a garden or a homesteading project. And that's a great example of how we can incorporate the positive parts of modern technology with some of these traditions. Energy sovereignty with renewable and natural energy sources could also have a huge impact. The fact that we can power things with the sun and the wind and the water is an incredible gift of modern technology. And it's so frustrating that corporate capitalism has refused to align with these technologies because of their money games. I'm not even going to get started with that. That is a whole nother topic we can discuss later. But I don't see why we can't dream of homes with reasonable modern luxuries like electricity and Wi-Fi and hot water that are powered in ways that are peaceful. Another idea that provides a really great framework for how a community could function comes from the maternal gift economy movement. I believe founded by Genevieve Vaughn. And the idea is that we have a built-in model that serves as an alternative to capitalism, and that is maternal gifting. It's a feminine economy, meaning that this heart-based and relationship-focused framework comes from the feminine energy, which can be present in anyone. But the idea is also that as mothers, we ask nothing of our babies. We give to them freely. We grow them in our bodies, feed them from our bodies, carry them on our backs, and protect them fiercely without any financial compensation. This pattern is mimicked between humans everywhere. As we grow, without indoctrination into the exchange economy, we are more likely to follow that maternal example and give and receive to one another lovingly and freely. And in a community that values the feminine, women, generalizing, hold this energy and keep the men connected to their hearts. My husband comes to me about his thoughts and decisions. If he were to consider making a decision that would harm life, the connection to and protection of life that I feel would rise up in me, and I would quickly be able to show him that perspective. So, by valuing the feminine and seeing it as the worthy and valuable way of viewing the world that it is, we're able to hold that alignment, but we have to find a way to find balance between one another. This idea can be started on as small a scale as you need and can grow from there. Looking at what you can gift others is so delightful, and I can just about guarantee that if you start this in your own communities, you will love it. My friendships have really changed over the last 5 years, as many of my friends and I increasingly practice this. We take care of one another, and we know that if anything happened to any of us, the others would be there. To give you some concrete examples, one of my best friends used to pick up my dog from daycare so that I could work. Later, when she was exhausted and needed help getting her laundry folded, I was there. We watch each other as cats and babies. I make them breakfast, they buy me dinner, and I have incredible friends, but our friendship has undeniably strengthened as we've learned about these ideas. I've really been able to see the community and village around me growing. If the idea of gifting as an economy is still feeling hard to understand, think of the simple example of paying it forward at a coffee shop. The idea, right, is that it lifts someone's mood and inspires them to do something else that's kind. Imagine following the flow of that kind energy, then expand that model to more and more aspects of daily life. And so just imagine how, as long as you have enough people in that community that are operating that way, you can trust that you can give freely and you will also be taken care of when you need it. I've seen this in different ways with my neighbors as well, where the more involved we become in their lives in little ways that make sure everyone is taken care of, the more they look out for us too. And when you have people looking out for you and your family, that is invaluable. You don't need to hoard wealth if your community is your safety net. And just another example is people giving us clothes for Caleb. We have been so fortunate to have so many clothes provided for our son, and many of them are welcome hand-me-downs that we will also pass on. It's so delightful to give your baby clothes to someone else who can use them. If you have a strong community, you'll know who has different things that you need. Brenda Salgado once quoted her grandmother as saying, "We only need 100 hammers for 100 people if everyone is isolated and afraid." I think about this idea all the time, and it's also changed the way I consume. And here's kind of a silly example. My friends and I used to go to the nail salon every couple of weeks. Eventually, we said, what if we bought the things we needed together and just started doing them at home? So some of us got the lights, some of us got the drills, and some of us got the gel. We just take turns getting whatever we need to do our nails, and we all save a ton of money. And as a bonus, we have a lot more fun and grow closer connections just getting to do them together. We've also had friends come over to help us with home repair, and Garrett's a plumber, which has definitely come in handy with others. In my life, the more that I think about these ideas, the more that things are able to shift towards this way of being. And when I remember to feed energy into this alternative, it grows. Sherri Mitchell says, one of the greatest oppositional tools to authoritarian rule is quiet, collective, cooperative, communal resistance. It eliminates the power that this system has over our lives. It's the grow food, chop wood, carry water plan. This is something that our human race was built on, that we would not have survived without. I've been talking a lot on my channel about what's going wrong. I've been really focused on stopping the harm with faith manipulation. Power hierarchies, and control happening in certain communities. But this kind of imagining about what can replace these things and focusing on where we want to go is what I really want this channel to be about. I think next week we are going to be ready to return to focus on the family and the harm they have created, but I really needed this break, and I want to try to stay mindful of that 80-10-10 rule. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing and or supporting my Patreon. And if you have any other ideas about community building, please leave them below. I'll meet you here next time on Reimagining Ourselves.